Hello everyone, welcome to my Dead Space remake, hard difficulty, no damage walkthrough. This is chapter 1, new arrivals, and at the start we need to run past these necromorphs, and compared to the original Dead Space, there isn't any moment where randomly a necromorph catches up to you and they just attack you and damage you. That happened a couple of times in the original Dead Space just randomly. It was really bullshit, but this doesn't happen anymore on the remake given the way the camera is positioned behind Isaac. And also with the way the necromorphs are designed when they're running. But we get the plasma cutter, and now we have to take out this guy. And this is where you're going to have a lot of trouble understanding the mechanics if it's your first playthrough, because the flinch animations are nowhere near as good as Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2, because this time around, the flinch animations are based on arbitrary damage values, so you have to deal a certain amount of damage to the necromorph before your melee is able to stun them. Because in general, like the plasma cutter is just not able to elicit hard stuns on the, or like minor stuns on the necromorphs. The melee is the only thing that can actually guarantee the stun. And it's pretty silly that it works like that, but at least it's nowhere near as inconsistent as Dead Space 3, because Dead Space 3, I don't even think the flinch animations on that game were just based on arbitrary damage values. They were just very broken overall, and it was very inconsistent when an enemy would be stunned by the plasma cutter or your other weapons. So, at least on this game, the arbitrary damage values are a lot more consistent. So when you're dealing with the basic necromorph, if you shoot them once with the plasma cutter, the next hit from your melee will stun them. And also, if you do 2 melee hits, that will be enough to stun the necromorphs as well. And also, you can actually stun lock the necromorphs with your melee. This only applies to the normal necromorphs, and I believe with the it does apply with the enhanced necromorphs as well. So like 2 hits is enough to stun them, whether it be plasma cutter plus melee or just 2 melee hits. That being said, though, if you are planning on stun locking an enemy with the melee, you've got to bear in mind that you got to watch Isaac's animations carefully, and also at times Isaac can be a little slow to register your melee input, and this can give the enemies plenty of time to actually attack you. And you have to make sure that when you do deplete an enemy's stun HP, that their HP is at 0 when they return to a neutral state. That's the only way it'll be stunned. And we have this necromorph right here. So here, I'm going to initiate the loop by doing 2 melee hits. He gets stunned. I'm going to hit him with the melee while he's stunned, so that I can deplete his stun HP, and then it goes to 0. As soon as he goes back into a neutral state, he will get stunned again by the melee. And again, I have to pay attention to Isaac's animations. I have to make sure that I'm in the correct range for the melee to actually hit the necromorph. And this is what will allow me to stun lock the necromorph. Very rarely you can get moments where they do the grab animation, and the grabs that the necromorphs do are so broken. They are the most bullshit grabs I have ever seen in a game. And I originally said this with the Callisto Protocol, but given the fact that you can turn off the QTEs in the Callisto Protocol, and the grabs were based on QTEs, you never had any moment where you took damage from grabs, even when the enemies grabbed you instantly out of the blue. But there's no system like that. The only alternative is to switch to single button taps when doing QTEs, but that's still not enough, because as soon as the enemies grab you, you take damage instantly, just like in Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 6, and Resident Evil Village. It's pretty bullshit. And these grabs just come out of nowhere, and at times the necromorph can just jump at a distance and grab you. Other times it will initiate the grab animation very close to you, but the active frame period is displaced, and what I mean is they grab you too quickly into the animation, like just before they even touch you, you're already getting grabbed. It's very bullshit. It's so badly designed in this game, and it's probably the worst aspect with Dead Space Remake by far. And that's why you've got to stay on top of these enemies. So I'm going to use the stasis to slow these enemies down, because of course I can't rely on the flinch animations the same way as I could rely upon them in the original Dead Space. And what you will notice is when you take off the leg of a normal necromorph, you can stun lock them with the stomp. This will not work on all the other necromorph types, like the standard. I'm sorry, not the standard necromorphs, the enhanced necromorphs, the pregnant necromorphs, and the armored necromorphs, which I don't understand because the armored necromorphs, they're supposed to be normal necromorphs, but they're just armored in certain body parts. But apparently, this remake classes them as a special enemy type, so they have increased HP, and they respond to stuns differently than the normal necromorphs. I don't understand that, but this is actually important to note. Remember how I said that with the normal necromorphs and with the enhanced necromorphs, in order to stun them, you have to hit them once with the plasma cutter and then melee them, or do 2 melee hits. Well, the other special necromorphs, like the pregnant necromorph, you have to hit them 2 times with the plasma cutter, and then the melee will actually stun the guy. Or you have to do 3 melee hits, which is suicide, and you'll get grabbed easily, which is definitely unfortunate. So that's why it's better to keep your distance and use your plasma cutter to stun them if they get close, or just aim for the leg by that point. So that's something you're going to have to bear in mind when you are trying to use the melee to actually stun these particular necromorphs. But that enemy I dealt with just then, that was a female necromorph. That enemy is annoying because in every single Dead Space game, it has the ability to shoot projectiles at you, and you can't grab the projectiles with kinesis. And also, I don't know if this applies to the other Dead Space games, but for some reason the female necromorphs have more health than the normal necromorphs. I don't understand why. It doesn't really make any sense. Here we have another necromorph, so I'm going to take his leg, and I'm going to stun lock him with the stomp. Stomping on this game is really good. Stomping in Dead Space 1 shouldn't even exist. I don't even know why they made it a mechanic in the first place. I mean, I understand that there were boxes on the ground that you could destroy if you used your stomp, but you could easily just use kinesis for that. Like, stomping in Dead Space 1, not only was it unbearably slow, but it had a really shit detection on the enemies, and it didn't stun lock the enemy very well or generate any kind of stun. And also, Isaac just randomly swapped between his left and right legs at his own choosing. It wasn't consistent. And so you expect him to do one animation, and then he does the wrong stun animation, and so you end up missing the enemy. And like, these factors together just make the stomp like completely pointless in Dead Space 1. Like, there's no reason to have the stomp whatsoever in Dead Space 1, but on this game, they've at least given a reason for the stomp to exist, just like in Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3, and that is a good design choice. Same with this room. This room you might remember from the original Dead Space, because this is where you had to gain access to that data board. But this room is a significant improvement, not only because the mechanics of this game are a lot more trustworthy than the original Dead Space. I'm not saying all the time, because there are times when the original Dead Space's mechanics are a bit more trustworthy than this game. But also, the explosive barrels. There are a lot of explosive barrels this time around in this room compared to the original Dead Space. And the explosive barrels in Dead Space 1 were terrible. Not only did they do very little damage to the enemies, but their range didn't make any sense. They had very limited range, despite the explosion effect saying otherwise. But they definitely improved the explosives on this game. But at times, the explosives can actually feel just as bad as Dead Space 1's explosives randomly out of the blue. I don't really understand that. Dead Space 2 and 3 perfected the explosive canister mechanic. Why did this game decide to go in between Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2's explosive barrel design? It doesn't make any sense. And also, this is where you're going to be introduced to some brand new mechanics exclusive to this remake. So you might have noticed that when I originally came into this room, there was an option to use the circuit breaker to remap the circuits, to channel power into a new area, like to gain access to a new area, or to affect light fixtures, or affect like life support, all that kind of stuff. They try to pass it off as if it's some optional mechanic that will allow you to change up these encounters in different ways on different playthroughs, but a lot of the times they're completely pointless, and other times the circuits have to be remapped in only one way in order to progress the story. So I think it's a mechanic that isn't really that interesting, and it's just there as a change to the aesthetic of going in one direction. So like right here, you have to specifically turn off the lights and then remap that power to the door. There's no other way to do it. And there's stuff for like, I mean, see, like right there. So you have like the maintenance room, you have the elevators, but you have to have the maintenance room and the elevator circuits active in order to actually get to the maintenance room. So like, why would they design it this way? It doesn't make any sense. That just seems like a very strange way to introduce this mechanic, and then they never really make it that intriguing of a mechanic to provide more options. It's definitely something that I don't really like in this game, but it's a minor thing. But keep watch over your surroundings. Necromorphs will attack you, so you got to memorize the spawns. And when it's dark, it's pretty hard to see the necromorphs. And I know they were trying to use the darkness here to increase the tension, but on my blind playthrough, this was nothing but aggravating because I was already clashing with the game's very strange mechanics, and I was really getting frustrated by it. And then this darkness turns up, and I'm like, really? Is this really necessary? How is this going to ramp up the tension when your gameplay mechanics are fucked already at the start? And like, these bad mechanics, like at the start of this game, really left a sour taste in my mouth. But then, as I got through the game, I warmed up to it, and then hydroponics happened in Chapter 6, and then the rest of the game just shows diminished quality. And it really sucks that that is the case, because it's the same problem that Dead Space 1 has, where fatigue just easily sets in because the pacing of Dead Space 1 is very sluggish and very slow. And Dead Space 2 fixed this, but there is still that onset of fatigue that can occur in Chapter 9 of Dead Space 2. But at least the onset of fatigue happens later in Dead Space 2 compared to when the onset of fatigue happens in Dead Space 1. And I mean, I do feel like the remake, the onset of fatigue happens much later on compared to Dead Space 1, but it still sucks that they haven't really fixed this issue with the sense of fatigue. And that's just the case with all of the Dead Space games, and I can't believe I ever put Dead Space on the same level as Resident Evil when I called it a Resident Evil series in terms of genre. It really isn't the case. Visceral Games / Striking Distance Studios / whoever's designing this remake, I don't know if it's Striking Distance Studios. I do feel like they preserved some good things from Dead Space, but at the same time they preserved some bad things from the original Dead Space. But we've gained access to the data board. Keep watch over the spawns. Try to memorize the locations of these necromorphs, and do your best to take off their legs and actually stomp them. But now that that's done, we won't be seeing a large amount of necromorphs for the rest of the chapter. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things with this game. So Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2, they were accommodating for plasma cutter only, and I didn't have a problem with it. I didn't put it on the same stupid level as Knives Out and Resident Evil Village, just knife only in general, or all these kind of stupid runs that people do in games. Because I felt like the creativity wasn't diluted by much when you were doing plasma cutter only in Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2. And the developers of Dead Space 1 even put in a trophy where they wanted you to beat Dead Space 1 with just the plasma cutter only. But of course, they didn't add all these other restrictions or anything. They just wanted you to beat the game plasma cutter only, and that's fine. And I was okay with it in Dead Space 2. And you could use the kinesis and the stasis modules. I mean, kinesis on the other hand was not very good in Dead Space 1. Kinesis got really good in Dead Space 2, and so it actually became an important mechanic. But at least the remake of this game, Kinesis is really good because you have the ability to use the necromorph pincers or blades and actually use them against other necromorphs. It's really good design. And they've actually made a slight change to this blade mechanic using Kinesis. So in this remake, there's actually a passive soft lock that is generated when you actually throw a blade at a necromorph. So even if you're not directly lined up with a necromorph, the blade will automatically turn in the direction of the nearest necromorph, and it will aim for center mass. And it's mainly 2 blades to actually take out a normal necromorph. I think with the enhanced necromorphs, it's 3. And then there are certain special enemy types that take 2 blades. Some of them take 3. But overall, Kinesis is just really good in this game. I really enjoy it. And at times I like it more than Dead Space 2's Kinesis mechanic because of the soft lock. Like the soft lock in the Dead Space remake, I feel is handled pretty well for the most part. I mean, at times it isn't, like when you're using explosive barrels, because what I have noticed is that there is also a soft lock generated on the explosive barrels when you use kinesis, and at times Isaac overshoots an enemy when he is using the explosive barrel, and so he throws it above the enemy sometimes, and it leads to a lot of close call moments where he almost misses, and it can be pretty frustrating at times. But with the blades, there isn't so much of an issue there. But skipping past this rather annoying sequence where you have to go back to the ship and watch an unskippable cutscene, after that, we need to get past that Leaper. There's a Necromorph right there, and these guys are not going to be able to catch up to you very quickly. At least on this game, Leapers are nowhere near as bullshit as Dead Space 2's Leapers. Leapers in Dead Space 2 were too fast, and at times their hitboxes, they could be very janky, and like aiming at their arms was very annoying to do because of how narrow the hitboxes were on their arms, and also their tendency to leap at you was so bullshit in Dead Space 2 because as soon as they leaped, there was nothing you could do to stop it. They get full-on hyper armor. It's very bullshit. But at least on this game, the passivity of the leapers is on a similar level to Dead Space 1's leapers when they leap at you. That being said, though, in the zero-G moments, leapers are a lot more dangerous compared to Dead Space 1's leapers when they're in zero-G because they leap at you very fast. And you've got to be on your guard when you're actually going through those zero-G moments, and there are leapers present. So aside from those moments, leapers on this game are pretty good to deal with, and they aren't as bullshit as Dead Space 2's leapers. That is pretty good. So aside from that, the rest of the enemy types, they aren't so annoying, at least with the lurkers. Lurkers on this game are the best they've ever been because using a Necromorph's blade, you can instantly kill lurkers up until Chapter 10, I believe. And also, on this game, this is something worth mentioning. They decided to make this game a commentary for all the weapons in mind, so they designed this game with all of the weapons in mind. And you can tell that this is designed with all the weapons in mind because of the way they introduce certain weapons. In the original Dead Space, the only way you were ever going to get new weapons is if you found the schematics for the weapons and then you bought them from the store, which was very, very weird. But in this game, they actually introduced the weapons in a more organic fashion. Like right now, we're about to gain access to the pulse rifle in a moment, and the way the pulse rifle is introduced to you is you get it from a dead body. And the flamethrower is the same way as well. You get it from a dead body that's right in front of you as you're going along the main path. Like, they make these weapons so hard to miss, and that means they don't want you to skip them. They want you to embrace them, and the game's pacing really benefits from this change. The fact that they're actually putting in the actual effort to make the game more creative, to actually encourage you to be very strategic and experimental with your weapons, that is the kind of thing that I like in games. That's the kind of thing I like in these survival horror games. And this was something that was non-existent in Dead Space 1 and 2 because Plasma Cutter only was the only way to go. There was never any incentive to go for the other weapons. But at least in those games, doing Plasma Cutter only didn't feel so stupid. Like, I still feel like the creativity wasn't so diluted when you were doing Dead Space 1 and 2, Plasma Cutter only, but I don't mind it whatsoever in Dead Space Remake. I mean, at times, to justify this new change with Dead Space Remake, they do use poor designs, but I will say the enemy placements and the way the mechanics work this time around, I feel like those are pretty good reasons to use all the weapons, and using the weapons on this game was practically a new experience for me because I was so familiar with the plasma cutter, I had no idea what a lot of the weapons did. So when I got the pulse rifle, when I got the flamethrower, I didn't get the force gun in my blind playthrough, but I did find it when I replayed hydroponics. When I was using the weapons for the first time, it was definitely interesting just seeing what these weapons did. It was a new experience for me when I was going through this game, and it was pretty enjoyable. But right there, we get access to the pulse rifle. The pulse rifle is a really good tool. It is very useful against lurkers. It's the only reason I ever use the mines on the pulse rifle. It's just to kill lurkers, because lurkers are one of the most annoying enemy types in Dead Space, and they've never been a good enemy, but this remake definitely makes some significant improvements to the lurkers to make them a pretty fun enemy to fight for the most part. But when you use the mines on the lurkers when they have their tentacles out, they will die instantly. However, this will not work in Chapter 10 and onward because they do get a health increase. But having those mines is definitely needed when you are dealing with lurkers, because lurkers, they can definitely affect the flow of gameplay when they're just spamming those stupid range attacks at you. And also when they're paired with other necromorphs, they can be so aggravating to deal with. And that's why the mines are needed, and they can be very helpful against the other enemies as well. And you'll be seeing some really fun strategies involving the mines when I get to later parts of the game, but that won't be for a while. Oh, and also, one last thing I'd like to say before I conclude this video. I'm not doing impossible difficulty because impossible difficulty is the same as hard difficulty in terms of the damage you do to the enemies and the enemy damage on you. They confirm this in impossible difficulty when you actually select this difficulty mode. The only difference is it has a permadeath system. You're only allowed one manual save slot, and if you die, you go back to the beginning of the game. However, if you restart your manual save before you die, you can restart from your manual save and have your save preserved for impossible difficulty, which is good design. And I'm glad to see that the developers were smart to implement that, because this game, as well as with the other Dead Space games, are not complementary to permadeath designs. And because there's really no difference between hard and impossible difficulty, aside from just the saving thing, that's why I'm making this a hard difficulty walkthrough. But to sort of emulate the experience on impossible difficulty, I'm going to try to go from the beginning of the chapter to the end of the chapter in one go, all on one save file. And if I fail the no damage requirement, I'll just restart from that manual save. That being said, though, if there are any downtime moments or any walking moments or any cutscene moments, I will be saving after those, because I don't want to sit through that kind of nonsense whenever I restart the chapter. It's just so aggravating. It's that kind of stuff that is not complementary to permadeath design, and why developers like Visceral Games, Striking Distance Studios, or whoever's handling this remake embrace these kind of stupid designs, like the unskippable cutscenes, even though this is literally next generation technology. We've seen what the PS5 is capable of with skipping these kind of downtime moments. Like, why they embrace these kind of stupid designs, I will never understand. It's been like this ever since 2008, and they haven't fixed this issue whatsoever. And they want to put in a permadeath mode? Are you fucking kidding me? Fuck that. This is why I am doing hard difficulty, and I'm going to stick to that. And with that all said, that is the end of this video. Stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.